and then we'd know we've got this many seconds before we're live, and we can come in ready.
Oh, I see. So we could.
You know that unprofessional start we always do? We wouldn't have to
So
do
I'd
that.
push a button, and then I could see the countdown and everything, and then we'd know to start.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. We are live.
You're not fooling anybody. I knew what you were doing.
Yeah, well, I can try. Good evening, everybody. How are we doing? I'm redecorating my room. Nice.
Over-caffeinated and warm. I want to open the window, but then everyone's going to hear the dogs. Actually, I might open them anyway.
Yes, have some fresh air. Hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully there's only one of Yann today.
I am the one and only.
No raw no words. Caffeine.
Nice.
It's going to be one of those streams. Hello, Melicon. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm not looking at them up-to-date things. We have a Daz, we have a Jenny, we have a Melicon. Hello, peoples. So, Mikey, how are you?
Well, yes, I'm very good. I've had a very interesting week.
Hello, Rosrick.
I have not had. This has got nothing to do with game dev, and I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I've not had a pair of jeans for over 5 years. Today, I bought a pair of jeans, and because I'm a short person, I needed them taking up. So I've got a first pair of jeans in 5 years.
Story.
Apparently, I look really good in jeans.
So much for the story. I can't express how happy this story is.
Now, he won't ask me how I am anymore.
Hello, Mindstammer. No, I'm glad. I'm glad you have some pants that fit.
Means something completely different in the UK. And I'm childish, so I'm going to laugh at pants. Yes, so today is going to be all about some updates, what we've been up to. We're going to show you a bit more of the development on the action RPG. Dramatic pause. Could have gone either way. Yes, it could have gone either way, Daz. You're quite right. I should also, because I often forget, I'm going to press start recording as well. Otherwise, we have to bring everything down from the YouTubes and it's low quality. We want our hot takes this evening to be bang on point and high quality.
Yep. So we're trying to go back to, because we went off our rotating schedule, timetable for a while. We're trying to get back to it now. So that's 1 week Godot, 1 week Blender, 1 week hanging out, 1 week talking about what we're doing and what's going on. So that's the plan for today. We do have some things to talk about. One of the things we've got is the latest build of the prototype for the action RPG dungeon creation course, procedure generation course. When I say procedure generation, specifically procedure generating the dungeons. It's not a course on everything to do with procedure generation.
Oh, no.
That sounds great, but that's not what we're doing. Mikey has this new build, but has not yet seen it.
Yes, and I think, and we'll repeat this. Obviously, the listeners that listen often will already know this, but the Godot action RPG course, yes, is going to be a series of courses. We've already got a couple of courses already out on the site. We do get questions, when is the course? There is no the course. It's going to be a collection of courses separated into the artistic side, the Godot side, and the musical side, and all that. And obviously, there are different packages that you can get to go along with that. So it's going to come out. It's now that Godot 4's out, we're going to be drip feeding you. I suppose is the best way of putting it. So what Mikey has currently is the current state of the 3D assets, some of which had to be remade, some of which we're playing with to remake them, but they're looking pretty good. And my current hot code. There's still some stuff I want to do, but Mikey, would you like? I would like to show them. And as part of the Godot stuff, you will be seeing a collection of assets as well. Yes. Do you want to share your screen with me as well, or shall I do the 30-second pause thing? No, that's fine. Let me click a few buttons first. Beep, boop. Beep, boop. Beep, boop. So, window. There we go. There's the dungeon core. Share. So you should be able to see me moving around here now. They can't see it, so let's make sure they can see it as well. Can we see both of us? No, I'm not going to faff. I can see both of us. Pew pew. Oh, can I hide that thing at the bottom? There we go. So this is the current state. Apparently, Yann's added some stuff Michael, in. Yep. You know when you click that last thing, now I can't see the screen anymore. I just see myself receding into the distance forever. Well, I don't know. Help. Help. Pew, pew, pew. Hold on a second. Let's see if I can rescue Yann. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on. Window, the dungeon, share. Awesome.
And hello, Yemek. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Okay, so things Mikey has seen, because right now he's in a bar. The things on the bar are procedurally generated, I guess is the way we're saying it. Basically, it's picking the right props for each place.
So
that's
yeah, they're predefined positions on the bar, but the prop that will be spawned in at that point will be different.
I'm not entirely happy with the solution I've got here, but it's a first iteration. But yeah, that's the thing you've seen.
Oh, glowy.
Yep. I've also changed the lighting in here because the low red was annoying me.
Ooh, the server
the other
room.
big differences you'll see to do with the chests, to do with the library, and a little bit in the throne room.
If we find them. This is one of the things about procedural generation. I don't know where things will be.
I don't either.
And I do like this bar.
So this room, for those of you who remember from last week, you probably already know, we have a bunch of little props in here and a little procedural generation that sometimes there's chairs, sometimes or table, sometimes there's a thing.
Hey, Yann. Oi, you can't wear it as a crown.
So every time Mikey comes in here, he jumps on there and says, I've got a skull crown. So I've changed it so if you jump up there, it falls off.
Oh, and then it blows up. So the boss, there's a deep thing here. The boss fight goes here.
I'm so proud of myself.
I appreciate the humor.
Oh, they also haven't seen the new addition to the throne. Okay, library.
Oh, hello. Yay! That's awesome.
So you'll notice that the shelves and the things in front of the shelves are all different.
Have we got some proc gen with placement of assets here as well?
Yes,
Awesome.
we have.
Obviously, this is a very crap library at the moment. There is and are no books.
Yes. I don't yet have any book props to play with.
Ooh.
So.
Oh, these are floating. This must be the magic area.
Oh, I got them from IKEA.
Yep. You built them yourself and you built them off the ground.
Yeah. You know, there's always a bit left over.
Oh, this is great.
Some people won't have seen the magic book yet.
Yes, I failed to find the magic room last week.
So I'm very proud of myself with this. And also, do they have sound from this?
I don't think so. I don't have any sound from it.
Shoot the portal. The portal.
Ow, that's very loud. I don't think I've got sound turned on at the moment. It basically makes a squeaker sound.
So I know that Mikey will always shoot these things, so I put a squeaker sound in there for him. But I'm very proud of that magic book.
In fact, they can probably hear that if I just do this. And if you couldn't or did, I'm sorry. Awesome.
So a lot of my last week with this has been to do with trying to get the optimization up to speed and playing with different ways of randomly placing props and furniture.
There's some
right
interesting...
now, the situation I'm not happy with, which is every single combination is placed at the same time, and then only one of them is allowed to stay.
Oh, I like this long corridor.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping to find some double rooms.
Well, you can force them.
Yes, this is true. Squeak, squeak.
But yes, the double rooms are working. I still have that weird bug where doors don't despawn, and I don't know why.
So occasionally there... Oh, here we go.
What you may not have seen is if Michael goes up to it and stays there... Oh, never mind. The eyes light up for a moment, and then it opens.
Ah, okay. If I find another one, I shall show them that. Those chests also exist when we get a dead end, don't they?
Yes, they do. Currently.
So to reward you getting lost.
Now, a lot of these pieces are going to be redone. Mikey and I were playing with different floor pieces,
Yep.
whether or not the floor details should be done with normals and height maps, or whether they should be done in mesh. Where do we land with that, Michael?
Well, it was an interesting result. I think we're going to experiment a little bit more with popping some textures on the surface, but we want to be careful that we keep the angular, clean look. This is actually a style that we want to go for, rather than having like the floor bit. We think that this floor is a bit boring. So we
Well,
can.
there isn't a floor. There was. I
What?
don't have
What?
an individual floor room, so I just put a plane there.
Yes. So there are various floors. We've got some wooden floors as well coming out. But we found, and you probably saw the post on the Discord, that we've played around with some textures, and it looked awesome, but it started to detract from the overall style that we wanted to go for, and that's important. If we start deviating now, it actually changes things dramatically. And one of the reasons we wanted to keep things relatively flat is time investment. The moment you start mapping textures, oh, this is awesome. It's going to light up the room. Da-da!
I love those particle coins. And yes, those coins are particles.
That's awesome. And they're bouncing off the floor and everything. That's a bit of a cartoony, but we want that kind of aesthetic. It's not a dungeon horror.
Well, that may not stay. It may stay. I just wanted something for now that made it feel like a bit of a looped pinata.
I mean, maybe not so dramatic. That is really a fountain of coins. I'm glad.
I mean, that was what I was playing with, right?
Yeah.
It was a little less dramatic before, but I wanted it for now while we're doing this to be like, oh yeah, he's a chest, as opposed to, oh yeah, that's a chest.
Interesting. What we didn't talk about this last week, but one of the things that we have talked about in the past is when you've got a procedural dungeon like this, and you've got only a set of certain pieces, you don't have an infinite number. How do you signpost where a player would be going? How do you get them to go? Oh no, I've been here. Yeah, I've been here. what are the chances? Okay, so I've been here. It's the beginning. But could there be like a random placement, like only one skeleton in this corner? So if you see that skeleton again, you know, oh yeah, I've been here, and you can go back.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things you could do. You could put landmarks in. You could, of course, make a map system where you could find a map or a mini map. I've been playing with ideas for mini maps. I'm not quite happy with any of them yet. The other thing you could do is some sort of navigation system whereby we could allow right-clicking to draw a line of dots to the throne room, for example, or to the exit.
Yes.
Using the navigation system. I haven't played with that. Like, it's not especially difficult from what I imagine.
Doink. Got a new game, Skull Football.
Yeah, the skull only lasts 10 seconds, and it vanishes.
I found the exit.
Yep.
Oh, and we sorted out this bug. I say we, Yann, has sorted out this bug. So we now have that. And then what we would do at the moment is we would spawn a new level, like so. Beep.
I mean, usually what you'd do is you'd have a choice, right? Do you go forward or do you go back?
Yeah. I mean, we could always say you can come back here to go up to the overworld as well. We want to give players a bit of choice.
So how do you like the new... Actually, what you should do, max out the amounts of rooms and then see if you can find multiple libraries and see if it makes a difference. Because I wanted to make them feel a little less uniform.
That's under the tiles, isn't it? And here, if I turn up the room fraction to...
I mean, maybe I'm not seeing that screen.
What do I need to turn it up to?
I mean, 90, 100, I don't know.
Okay, I'll try 100, and then I will redo the game, and maybe you will see it again.
I don't. I see me. You close that window.
Yeah, I'll need to reopen that window. It's just loading up at the moment. There we go. Now let me make it full screen. Now let me Alt-Tab out and share that window with you. And I don't know why I'm giving a running commentary, but...
Because all they can see is nothing. There we go. I can see it now.
And, oh, it has actually switched back to it. So, boop, there we go. So I'm going to regenerate just to keep things fresh. Whee! Straight in, to a double room with the bug.
Yep. And that shouldn't be happening. Like, I think there's an order of operation problem going on here, because if it knows the wall is being removed, it should know that the door is being removed too. But see if you can find a double library, or a triple library, or a quadruple library.
Yes, it's pretty impressive when we get the rooms themselves. I mean, this should be almost all rooms now.
It is all rooms.
Which actually makes navigating pretty difficult. Is there a chart? Oh, here we go. Here's a nice double room.
Yes, but it's not a library, but yes.
It's not a double library. Sometimes you get rooms that are being spawned that are L-shaped, and I really, really like those.
There we go.
Oh, whoa. This is a mega library. It's a tea library.
So I'm hoping that the little variations in each section should make them feel a bit more natural.
And of course, this one's naturally going to have a hole in it to walk through. Oh, this is awesome. And again, once it's got books in and is populated,
right? And potions and whatever else, skulls.
Yes, I mean we could spawn in a little area with a table with a spell place.
I mean, I want to improve my prop generation system because right now I'm not happy with it. It's spawning in every possible thing and then removing all but one feels very messy.
Yes, spawning everything in when you could spawn a certain collection of items in would make more sense.
Well, it's just like pick one and then spawn it, as opposed to here's everything. Wow. Give me 1 second. His cat is singing the song of his people.
He wants water, he does. So yes, this is really coming along now, and I do love the first-person view. It does feel like a different game at the moment from the third-person aesthetic that we were going for and gameplay that we were going for before, but this is really just about the maze generation, and then later on we will get to the point where we have
L-shaped bar.
Yeah, nice, eh? Just talking about it being in first person at the moment has a completely different feel. And you know, from this point, you just carry on with it and make a first person action.
Yeah,
RPG.
I mean, we're not worrying about character or NPCs. We're not worrying about inventory. We're not worrying about spell system or combat or anything like that, because it's not what this specific course is about. There are downsides to the specific maze generation, not least of which you end up with nonsense like a huge long corridor at the end of which is a bar, a little door, little corridor, second bar. Like that's entirely possible. Makes no sense, but it's possible.
That's procedural generation for you, isn't it?
Well, there's different ways you could do it, right? You could use a different algorithm which says, okay, these rooms have to be a certain distance apart. You can't, have them separated by these kinds of things. But for every one of those rules, you have to sit down and think about them and write them.
Yeah, of course. And then you start getting quite restrictive. But yes, does it make sense to have a bar in between these two rooms?
Well, yes, because they're skeletons.
How do
Where
they
else
drink?
are they going to sleep?
What, the bar? Whee!
I mean, they should really have a dance floor.
You want a disco room? I mean, this is getting there. This is the server room.
Of course they need a disco room. I mean, how else are they going to listen to Boney M?
No. Oh, no. There we go. So that's... Yeah, I do like the fact that this now generates these multiple, not multiple size rooms. It brings things together and actually makes it... Oh, I've been here. How do you know I've been here?
It's mystery. Natural sense of direction.
Mystery. So yeah, this is really coming on now. And so the maze generation is almost... I mean,
at some point, I'll need some more assets. The maze generation itself is pretty solid, with the exception of the door bug.
Oh, where did I used to get stuck?
There.
You never guess what I've done. Yep, I'm stuck. I'm good at finding bugs, I am.
I mean, that's not a bug. It's just a Mikey trap.
It's a feature.
It's like the squeaky portal or the skull that falls on your head.
You know I'm going to do it, so it's got to be there. Right,
so I've learned some interesting things about optimization.
Yeah.
Not least of which, the way that we've got collision shapes on rigid bodies makes a huge difference. If you're using complex shapes, or specifically, you can't use trimesh shapes on a rigid body, but if you're using a detailed convex shape, it will slow the game right down.
So one of the things that Yann and I were discussing, was it yesterday or the day before? Bare bones. I like it. So one of the things that Yann and I were talking about the other day was, where do we do the collision shapes? Because in one sense, Godot accepts if you parented things in a certain way, I could put -col or -col only.
Well, let's. You missed an important part. When he's making it in Blender, if he names things a certain way, Godot will automatically import them.
Yes. And so, what is a favorite? Skeleton's favorite meal? Goulash. Yeah, I didn't read the second bit. So, So yeah, where do we make the collision shapes? Do we make them over in Blender and just import them, or do we make them over in Godot? And if I make them over in Blender, they don't come through as a collision layer that Yann's going to find useful, because when we've got hundreds of objects and they've all got tri-mesh collisions on them,
Well, shall I show what I've actually got?
yeah, that'll be awesome.
Give me a moment to load Godot, and then I'll share my screen. So this came about because the little bar stools we have, as you've seen in the storage room, I have a whole bunch of stools on top of each other, specifically because I know Mikey's going to want to push them. That's why I put them in. Share my screen now. But the problem I had was that my original collision shape for the stool was a cylinder. So you hit a stool and it would just roll forever and ever and ever, which is not actually what you'd expect, because if we look at the stool, it's a three-legged thing. So then I decided to try this, right? I said, well, what happens if we actually do a single convex collision shape? And it makes this. Now, this works okay, but if I try and run the game, when it runs, la la la.
There we go.
Top right, you can see my frames per second. I'm maxing at 30. And if I find a stool...
Oh, that's fortunate.
Oh, it's actually improved now. I was dropping down to 2 frames a second at one point.
Ouch.
So then I was thinking, well, maybe we don't want anything that complicated. So instead, I went in and I just deleted the wrong thing. Nope. There he is. I went in and I just made a cylinder on top and then 3 cylinders where the legs are. And that behaves a lot better. And then we got the same problem with the chalice. Like, do we want this to be simple or not? Well, this kind of wants to be jagged. And I found that simplifying this actually doesn't make much of a difference. So there's a real not a dividing line. There's a balance to find. Then you get things like the throne. I could make this a tri-mesh collision layer, right? But that really slows the game down. When you touch it, it really struggles to figure out where you're supposed to be. So you'll notice an immediate drop in frames. So instead, why not
should
keep it
also
simple?
imagine you'd get it being quite jerky during that interaction as well, as it's trying to work out.
You get a sudden drop in frames and then it comes back again. And that's the kind of thing you notice. So the question was, should Michael be automatically generating the collision shapes in Blender? Because he can, right? He could just say, take this and generate a collision shape for it. And I think we've gone with the idea of no, because the simpler we can keep them. Let me find one of the corridor pieces. And if I just look at the colliders,
you can see how much simpler those are. And of course, one of the things you might think is, oh, well, you could make those collisions. You could do a bounding box collision around objects in Blender and export that. I've done that before. I think in Godot Getaway we were doing that for certain assets. And the problem is it still comes across as a much more detailed collision shape. In Godot, there are certain primitives that are far more optimal.
Well, it's also a box.
Yes.
And there are times you don't want it to be a box. Like if I want the stool to roll,
you need cylinders.
It needs to not be a box,
yes.
right? It can't be a single box, maybe multiple boxes, but let's find a stool.
And there are actually multiple times we're going to come across places where, okay, we can do this in Godot, or we can do this in Blender. And that's one of the things, right? You need to make a decision as per the project that you're working on. Does it make sense to do this particular thing, whether it's collisions or whether it's some procedural materials or something like that? You need to decide as and where you're going to create those things.
Now, if I was really worried about it, I'd notice that the stools are actually pentagrams or pentagons. So they shouldn't be rolling quite like this, but with the legs the way they are, it rolls a lot better. When they were cylinders, it didn't work at all. Same with these cups, right?
Well, they kind of just continue rolling, don't they? If you make something a solid cylinder, it will just roll until it stops, right, which is not what these do.
Whereas these roll much better now. On the other hand, these are just boxes. They could just be boxes. At this point, I'm just going around because I can. And these are coins. Hello, coins. Nom 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 nom.
I love it.
All right, gonna stop sharing my screen.
That's all right. And we're back again. Well, actually, just you're back again. I need to click a button for that. This one here. There we go. And he's back.
From outer space.
I'm not going to try and do the words because I always screw it up.
Just walked in to find you here with that sad look upon your face. Should have changed that stupid lock. I should have made you leave your key if I'd known. But
welcome to karaoke with me and Yann.
You know, I grew up in industrial metal clubs.
Singing that? Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Actually, it would make a really good metal cover.
So, yeah, the action RPG is coming along. And,
actively in development, yeah.
I think next time we come around, I do want to revisit the idea of texturing and just show you guys why we're not going with the main texturing route. But I want to play it with a few more things first to see how it comes out.
So on our original test, we thought, well, is this going to be more performant to bake in a height map and a normal map? And you can absolutely do that. But the problem we've got is that these are quite large objects. We didn't want to use very large textures. And Mikey worked out that we were getting like 1.3
pixels per inch in real world scale.
Great. Like when you saw it in game, the floors suddenly became very blurry.
A bit blurry and jagged. Now you can turn on. So I baked out a couple of different maps. I baked out the diffuse map. I baked out an ambient occlusion map so we could fake shadows and all that lot. I also baked out a normal map and then a displacement map. And for the displacement, I made sure it was 16-bit, so at least we've got a bit more. It doesn't end up being so steppy. And then in Godot, you can turn up the layers. So I turned up those maximum. And we haven't done a performance test with it yet, but basically at a 124, so a 1K texture for a 20-meter room, looks okay as long as you don't look at it. So I then shrunk it down. So I under the UV options, you can say, right, tile it 2x2. So that's the equivalent of a 2K texture. And it looked better. And then I did it again. And obviously the texture's getting smaller and smaller and then repeating. So it's not quite the same. It's not the same aesthetic. And by the time we reached 4K, it was looking pretty good. And one of the questions is, does it look good enough with the parallax also being enabled? So we've got real depth there. Is that more performant than just the floor we're going for in the first case? Because it's a lot of extra work to bake out all the extra textures.
Yes.
So the question is there, can we just get away with geometry?
We could also be using that we're not using the textures. Like there's a new decal system. There's the detail layer where you can put a whole new layer of texturing on top of stuff.
Yeah.
And then you can switch those out to give you some more variations. But the problem is our original design aesthetic isn't that. We had a very flat, cartoonish, angular, lots of pentagons. That was the look of the original prototype.
So one of the things that I do want to play with is when we have a wall, rather than having quite flat faces and angular faces, is having more faces and more jaggedness, but actually with a normal map. So you can have a blob with a normal map on it, and it actually looks like a rocky
surface. For those people who don't know what a normal map is, Michael, what's a normal map?
A normal map is a type of bump map. I'm glad you asked. What is a bump map? Well, there are two types. There's a displacement map or a height map, and there's a direction map. Now, you could have a normal map which shows the direction of light, but not its displacement. So you can have a surface, let's see if I can get sighted on, that's like this, and another surface that's lower down, but because their normals both point that way, they will look the same on a normal map. But on a height map, this one will look a lighter color than this one because this one's higher up than this one. So
to make that even more simplified,
it makes things
if you imagine you've got your flat surface, right? The way you would show where the light is going is you draw the normal, the perpendicular, and the light hits there, and whatever that angle is must be the same on the other side. But if there's a slight unevenness, then that normal is in a different place. With a normal map, you can have a flat surface and pretend that it's bumpy. So you say, at this point, the normal is in this direction, so angle the light that way.
So they're a great optimization technique if you've got lots of geometry. Because we do have quite a bit of geometry in some of our meshes. However, they're not detailed at all in terms of their bumpiness. They don't have scratches in them, and they don't have extra bits like that. And that's potentially something we can add whilst keeping the same aesthetic. We could potentially put scratches that are very sharp. But what we've discovered is for the whole room scale, that scratch would look very jagged and actually doesn't look very nice because of the size of texture.
These pieces weren't designed with that in mind. So to add them in now looks weird. So then the question became, do we now go back a few steps and think, okay, we're now texturing everything? Because you can't texture just the floor, right? It's going to look weird.
Yeah,
so now
we tried it. It looks weird.
Pillars and everything else. Like, otherwise, you've got two different aesthetics happening in your game. Or do we just go back and say, we're not going to be using normal maps. We're going to just use geometry.
I still think we're going to lean towards geometry, and ultimately, one of the things, if you were doing this in your own project, to extrapolate it out even further, it would depend on the platform that you're actually trying to go for. So, if you required a room and you needed to put a single texture on it, if you go for a 4K texture, that it looks much better than a 1K texture. But does the platform that you're trying to deploy to support 4K textures? It would look even better with an 8K texture, sure. If you're deploying it to people who have got lots of VRAM in their game in order to have it in there.
And don't forget, you don't just have the one. If you've got, every object has an 8K texture, you're in real trouble.
Yeah, you're chewing up VRAM. And 8K doesn't sound that much more, but for every time you double that, you're quadrupling the size, subject to some optimizations, but you're quadrupling the size of the image. So literally a 1 megabyte, let's say 1K texture, would actually be quite large, would end up being, what would it be, 2 at 2 for it would follow along with that, wouldn't it? In terms of the resolution
Where'd you get
increase.
the quadrupling?
Well, if you go from 1024 by 1024.
You said quadruple in one sense, then you just doubled it in the other one. I'm confused.
It's me getting confused with myself. So if you've got a 1 megabyte texture, that's 1K, and you have a 2K, it will be 4 megabytes in size, subject to some optimizations and everything else. But linearly, it gets very big very quickly. And I don't know what the number is. Someone calculated.
Well, we discovered this when we were playing with the Mag Racer prototype a couple of years back, where we just made every texture 2K texture.
No, there were 4K textures in there because I baked some in.
Every building, every ship, every prop. And then we ran it, and the frame rate was through the floor. Like, it was just too small or too low because we hammered the VRAM.
Okay, so a 1 megabyte 1K texture at 8K is 64 megabytes.
Right.
So it really gets big really quickly. And it wouldn't take long with multiple things to actually get to a point where that's too much on screen. Now, one of the ways of looking at it is when you're creating the texel density, is what it's called when you put a texture on the screen itself. If you're viewing it on a 4K screen and you go really, really close and you zoom in, then you might benefit from something like a 16K texture. But if that particular object is only ever seen from a view distance that fills up half the screen, then you're wasting. You're wasting.
There's a few things like that, right? There's good UV mapping. Like, where's the attention going to be? There's not having geometry when no one's going to see it, because that's things that are going to be textured.
Oh, that was a good one. We'll put a pin in that. We'll come back to texture. Not texture, but mesh is where you can't see it. Carry on.
That was it. That was the whole thing.
Now, moving on to... So one of the other things that we discovered is when we're putting all these procedural models together is... how procedural do we want to make things? What's our smallest quantity of object? Because the way that we're structuring it is we could have building in Blender. You could just have the floor, the walls, all in situ to begin with. But we don't want that because we want to be able to swap out floors. We want to be able to swap out walls. We want to be able to swap out door frames, etc. So
we had a whole long, almost debate about this because
it was...
I was arguing for the assets you get with the course, or for the extra assets you can buy, it'd be like, okay, here's this wall, here's a variation of this wall, here's a variation of this wall, like the corner, you could drop it in on this floor, here's your piece. And Mikey was saying, no. Here's this wall, here's this pillar, here's these arches, here's this floor, here's this running board. Like all these extra pieces, so that if you want to swap them out, you can. And my argument was, but that leaves us with a whole bunch of unseen geometry.
So
And
there's
Mikey's like, yes, but it allows a lot more flexibility.
yes, so you've got this trade-off. And one of the things that we learned by going through the entire process is that if you're damned if you optimize too early, you then can't edit your models as easily. So for instance, with a can I do this? Hold on a moment. I want a visual representation rather than talking about it. And so
I mean, it came about because we were looking at some of the borders along the floor, and there was a lot of interior geometry.
yeah.
And I was pointing out to Mikey that we are object culling, we're not vertex culling. So if we can see this room, there's a lot of extra detail here. And Mikey said, well, it's going to take a long time to delete those. And once they're deleted, we can't put them back.
Not without rebuilding the room,
Right.
right? So that's the crux. So I think, yep. Hopefully you guys can see the screen. I don't know why I've opened up that. Disappear. Right. Let's bring everything back into the scene. Excellent. So one great example would be the dead end. Let me turn off face orientation for the moment. The dead end is all the way over here. Right, so there's a dead end here, and it's completely not optimized. It's just things shoved in. And there are certain things within this model that are modular elements, things that we built. Now, obviously, in this particular instance, let's move everything else from the screen so we can focus. Oh, it's doing that weird thing again. I don't know if you guys have this, but I can't use control and space to make this window large at the moment. So I'll just use control and space.
That was the thing you could do.
Yeah, I do like doing it when I'm working here. So looking at this geometry, these definitely don't need to be here. So I could come in and very quickly cull them. They came in because I clicked on the wrong thing and moved things in. And I could come in and start deleting these chunks here and so forth. You can delete things and optimize like that.
Already, some of these pillars are broken.
No, they're not. Just everything's not on there.
Oh, okay.
Yep, that's just hidden away. So we've got this extra geometry down the back here that also doesn't need. And you go through and you start deleting things like these. And a great example would be, and imagine they were still at object level rather than all in this one mesh at the moment. But then if Yann comes along and says, oh, I really like the dead end, but could you pull this wall back?
Yeah, like, but could you realign the arches? Or could we have a pillar in there?
So if something else was selected there, that's okay. It can be part of the process.
I mean, the other one is, can you zoom in on the little border at the bottom there?
This little one here, the one that's missing something.
No, the one that exists.
I'm sorry.
The actual border, the one that is there. Don't zoom in on the thing that isn't there. Zoom on the thing that is.
Oh, this thing here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So the way this is created is Mikey has created a little slab, and then from what I can see, it's an array, right? He's extended it.
So whilst you're talking about that, I'm just going to go over to the bit that hasn't been smooshed down to a single mesh, and we can talk about it.
Well, you can show me as a single mesh, because the point I was going to make is there's a lot of interior faces and vertices that
yes, inside.
From my end, I don't quite want. Like when I'm putting the level together, I don't want them there because they're potentially causing performance issues.
Yes.
But from a Blender point of view, you do want them here because these aren't finished. Right?
No, they're not in their final form. And if you wanted to grab one of these, this is an array modifier that is then mirrored. But if you wanted to use this object elsewhere, and we'd already deleted all of the extra geometry from it that wasn't necessary. So you can see here, this has already been partly optimized. We don't have any back geometry or bottom geometry, but there are a series of overlapping faces where they're touching.
Right. And the point is, if you want to make any changes to these, let's say you want to put some divots in, or you don't like that curve or anything like that, at this stage, making one change, especially if you're using an array modifier, becomes really useful, right? All the geometry still exists. Once you've put it in a stage where, okay, it's game ready, you can put them in, all the faces deleted, those changes can't happen anymore.
Yeah. Exactly. So this one's already partially optimized, and this will be a bad example, or maybe it's a good example. Yeah, here we go. I can no longer go round my object with a loop cut because I've removed objects from the. I've removed geometry from here, and that is problematic if we still need any changes to happen.
Daz has a question, could portal occlusion be used procedurally as well? I'm assuming that it's objects-oriented culling as opposed to faces. It is object-oriented culling. I don't think you can change it to faces. I've certainly not seen an option to it. And the way I've done it is all of the walls and doorways have occlusion faces.
Yeah.
So every time you're in a room, and all of the corridor pieces, anytime you're in a room, if there's a wall there, it's not rendering anything past them. Thanks, dog. However, the doors, because they move, don't have occlusion culling. They specifically tell you don't animate occlusion culling unless you really have to, because it's very intensive. So the moment those doors start moving, you're gonna have to switch the occlusion map or change how it occludes. What that means is if we have a bunch of extra detail in a room, even if it's where no one will ever see it, it's still getting rendered.
And this is something that we toyed with backwards and forwards during some tests that I literally just duplicated. I think it was 100 by 100 rooms, and again, it's a kind of a false test. It's just an idea about how performance is affected, and fortunately, geometry wise, it seems to render all of those without any culling turned on pretty well.
But then you have to figure out things like particles and
Yes,
environment,
and then you
and
have to add
volumetric
everything else
fog
up.
and lighting and shadows.
Is lighting and shadows the same thing?
No.
Cool. Yes, because you can
Because
turn
you don't have
shadows
to have a
off.
shadow on
No,
lights,
you
exactly.
don't. Yeah.
And you could bake your lighting.
Yes.
We're not using baked lighting. We're using SDFGI.
Well, we want things like the flames to flicker and change the ambience in the room. So we don't want to bake that color in, for instance.
We're also using a different form of global illumination. Like we're using sign distant field global illumination, so you don't have to bake anything in advance. If we were using voxel GI, we would bake it. But that means we can't change the lighting environment very easily.
Yeah.
The way we have it now, we could pick a different lighting environment every time we go in. So, okay, these are the color temperatures for the lights.
Or if the level were to change to a more green hue because there was the poison boss or something along those
or
lines.
You've got a bright pink light coming through a doorway. Like you don't now have to rebake that part of the corridor.
Definitely. And baking takes a long time. I've played a lot with baking cakes. I played a lot with baking engines, and the last time I played with it, it was all CPU baking. So it took an extra length of time on top of that. And with that, and with Godot 4, you do need to make sure your UVs are right, even if you're not using textures. Godot 4 requires the
at least in the alphas. Like I haven't actually tested.
We should try it again.
Quite dog. I haven't actually tested since we went live, but certainly when we were playing in the alphas, all of our assets that we previously made didn't reflect light properly because
the engine requires the UV maps
because they weren't designed for it.
And of course, there's things with the UV maps as well. So if you've got a UV map at different scales, different texel scales, it's going to affect how the lighting and how detailed the lighting can possibly be within a certain asset. So there's things that need to be played with there. I don't think we've come across any specific problems, but it's certainly worthwhile knowing that if we make something and unwrap it and make something else, and we end up not giving it enough texel space, that its lighting might not be as good as it could have been.
Yeah.
Which is very important for something like a hero asset, maybe the throne or something along those lines.
I was toying with the idea of not putting any lighting effects in this version of the course, but it occurred to me that if we're making a course about building a procedural dungeon, part of that is making it look pretty.
And
the
lighting.
Environment, the lighting and the volumetrics are all part of that.
Yeah, you want to be able to procedurally light, so torches are in an appropriate place and etc. That is important.
And the optimization that goes with it. Like God of 4 has this lovely new feature where you can put a distance on lighting, and after a certain distance, it just doesn't render that light.
Yeah.
But it doesn't do that with particles. At least not in the way. Well, you can make it do with particles, but not by default. So there's little things we do where if you're more than 40 meters away, just don't show these things.
Yes, and that has the downside of potentially a bit of pop-in occasionally. If you manage to procedurally generate a really long corridor, anything further than 2 rooms away,
because we're using volumetric fog, we get away with it.
Yeah. But if you turn that off, it's very obvious. Things pop in and out. And
in the same way that I limit the distance of the camera because we can.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense as well. Then there's less chance of out of scope geometry being rendered.
And really, this goes back to like having a strong sense of what you want the aesthetic to look like gives you certain options. If I know I want this volumetric fog, which we knew from the beginning we did, and if I know that I want very flat looking cartoony meshes,
Yeah.
and if I know that I want these specific colors, that allows me to do things like, well, I don't really need screen space reflections because it's not that kind of game. They look pretty, but they don't fit. Turn them off, save some frames.
Although with screen space reflections, we might want them on if we got a reflective room, like maybe the throne room has a reflective surface, because it looked amazing with the texture you had on the other day, where
Well,
you'd actually turn the
that doesn't
roughness down.
actually need screen space reflection unless you want to see the throne reflected in the floor.
I was thinking the particles, the
Right.
fires
Well,
going along.
the light from the particles you'd see. But yeah, like it's those kinds of conversations. So having a strong sense of what you want means you can make decisions like, well, actually, I don't need these special effects because we don't mod them. All of that being said, there is never a reason to put in motion blur.
Please don't.
It's awful.
I think it's objective. I genuinely don't understand motion blur. I know what it's there for.
It was put in because it's trying to simulate a movie experience. Even though movie cameras don't do that anymore.
Well, if you want to simulate a 24 frame per second, you will have some motion blur. But naturally, you will have some motion blur. But screens don't kind of put it in. They give you sort of like jagged frames if you don't have that blur in there. One game that I have seen motion blur turned on in, which I thought didn't have it originally, was yes, you are, Otterick. Yes, you are. You're hearing yes, woof woof. One of the games that I had motion blur turned on, and I was like, is the PS4 just running it slowly, or is motion blur turned on? Because by default, it has quite a few cinematic effects turned on, and it was The Last of Us 2. And so it did have motion blur turned on, but it was done in a very sympathetic way. It wasn't cranked so that when you turn, you just go... Bleh.
I don't like it.
Yeah, I turn it off in nearly every game, but I will hold my hand up and say Naughty Dog did a fantastic job with not overdoing the motion blur. And I think that's the same with a lot of effects post-processing that's put onto games. The other one I'm a bit about is, well, there's two. One is chromatic aberration, where that's great for a concussive thing, but leave it out every other time, or like warp speed or whatever it happens to be. The other one is where they simulate rain on the screen, or you're wearing a dusty mask. And the thing is, it doesn't change throughout the entire game. So you've got this like circle here on your screen. It's like, I want to rub it off. Clean your visor, mate.
Terry says the first thing I do in a game is immediately turn off motion blur.
Yes.
That's almost the first thing I do. The first thing I do is turn it on so I can turn it off again.
Bit like delete,
just so they really know when they look at their data that they're taking from my Steam game.
When the telemetry, yeah. It's a bit like deleting the default cube. Be gone.
Yep.
To start, I'll add the default cube.
I will often add and delete it 3 or 4 more times just so it knows who's boss.
You know what I did? I have genuinely created a Python script to delete the default cube, add it back in. And if I just put that in a for loop, if I'm really feeling it... Infinite loop. Yeah, so we should talk about a few other things that we want to get through, because I have clocked the time. We've spent a lot of time on the God of Action RPG, which is fine. Yeah, right. Because we're really excited about it, and it is coming together. And we do want to show you. We'll keep showing periodically how we're getting on, and we'll really deep dive every 4 weeks or so when we're just giving everybody an update. An update for people wanting the Python course. The Python course is coming real soon. The Python Blender course. So it's specifically how to use Python in Blender, not just how to use Python and then translating it to Blender. So we just spend all of our time within Blender itself. Now that's already available for lifetime backers, and they already got the access to it. I turned it on so I wasn't faffing during the stream trying to...
Did you remember to tell them?
I am now. And
no. In the email, we've had this conversation.
There'll be an email coming out later. But yes, that's now available for all lifetime backers. So if you want to get your chops into that, you can do. In the background, I'm still working away on the assets themselves and the asset course, which will be part of the God of Action
Just
RPG.
To go back a little bit,
for
those of you who are interested in the Python for Blender who are not lifetime members, you'll be getting it soon. Lifetime members get the early access to stuff so they can give us the feedback to let us know if things have changed, and then we release it to the public.
An ETA on that will be a couple of weeks to a month before it's fully launched. Right. At the moment, it's 2.5 sections long, and it's probably going to be about 6 sections in total.
Very nice.
Once the editors have got through it. Woo!
What else? I'm looking at doing some particle videos. Seriously, more serious tutorial rather than just, hey, yeah, I'm playing with particles.
Yeah.
There's a few things I want to test first. I'm still not comfortable with how to use ribbon particles, which is a new thing in God of War.
Ooh, is that like when spaceships go and they got a trail behind them?
You can put a ribbon on your particle.
What?
But I need to, or a tube trail. There's a trail that particles can have, but I don't know how to use them properly yet. Right. So I want to play with those a bit more and then figure out what it's going to look like. I'm thinking that's going to be a short little free course. But if it gets big enough, then maybe it won't be. But it'll probably be free.
Well, it's sometimes challenging. So when we start and we've got obviously idea generation, Yann and I were talking the other day about the particles, because the video a couple of weeks ago for the particle party that we did, and Yann was making a load of different things. That was really popular and people were enjoying it. And we were talking about, we've got a particles course for God of 3. Is there a chance of updating it or adding the God of 4 components? And
well, just a real look at here's what the options do. How can we use them? Like, what kind of effects can we do? If you want to create a certain type of thing, what would you do? And there's some interesting little quirks, and things don't always work the way you think they're going to work, and there's a bit of trial and error. And I want to nail that down before I start recording anything.
And particles, as we've discovered, if you put enough of them in a small enough space, you will cripple high-end hardware.
Well, specifically those giant particles. I'm not quite sure why, but yes.
It was quite an eye-opener. Actually, I didn't, because there weren't that many particles, but I walked into the middle of it and it just went blah.
I'm not quite sure what's happening there, but something is.
But yeah, particles have to be used. They were GPU particles as well, so it wasn't just a CPU bottleneck. So we might.
And I don't know any shader code, despite having tried to learn it a few times. Like, my brain just refuses to internalize this stuff.
I've been playing around with shader code. It's because in Blender there's the OSL language, so you can actually type.
Well, in Godot you could type shader code for your particles, but I don't know how, so I'm not going to.
I played with it a few months back, and I created a chessboard just using materials, and then I created a chessboard using Blender's shader editor, so basically manipulating it with maths. I thought, I wonder if I can do this in OSL. And 2 days later, yes. I was like,
So I was looking at the documentation today, and there's an example how to create thousands of fish using shader particles in God of War.
Yeah.
I took one look at the first chunk of code and went, what? Bit shift? What? Why? No.
Yes, the why. That's one of the things. I'd love to be in a position where I can do at least a short tutorial on shader code. I'm certainly nowhere near it at the moment, but I do find it very interesting, the fact that you can, especially if you use signed distance fields. We touched upon that today with how how Godot does its rendering. But signed distance fields are a great way of actually constructing anything you like. It's incredible. There's an artist that I can't remember the name of. He's done a girl in a hoodie in a snow scene. He's also done a forest.
Banksy.
No, he's a Blender artist.
You can actually use
CFGI
collision in particles.
That'd be interesting. So you can have a scene where particles are bouncing off of a non-piece of geometry.
If you shine a bunch of particles onto a piece of geometry and then the player walks in front of it, they'll silhouette.
Nice. So there's lots to play around with shaders. To be confirmed, 2025, 6, something like that.
I'm not doing shaders.
As I say, I'd love to.
Someone else can teach it for us. Like, that'd be great. I don't understand shader code. I don't know what it is. Every time I try and do a tutorial, even by people who really know what they're talking about, I
It's
just
code for
can't internalize it.
shaders. It's
Like, I
quite low level.
understand,
It's quite low level. That's
but
the
yeah.
thing. It's not when you compare it to Python and GDScript, it's very low level, and obviously it's a much older language. We're going kind of back in time with how, so it's not as user
I think
friendly.
it's just trying to understand the whole new language that I don't know, on top of how to break this down into a mathematical equation, on top of how did you do that? Like, I end up looking at this code and it just makes no sense to me.
Yeah,
Um,
same here. I could get.
we are coming close to the hour.
We are.
We should
I
open this
found it quite interesting doing the checkerboard. I think I used sine and cosine in order to do it, and then clamped something or other to get certain values. But the thing is, it's not internalized, and trying to go through the process of doing it again. Could I do it again without looking up the documentation again? No, it's not.
I remember
It's not.
documentation
It's
for
not
adding
appearing yet.
a tutorial for adding a shader outline to a 3D object.
Yes, we were playing that. When were we playing
Did
with
that 4, 5, 6 times. Still can't figure it out. Like, I have no idea what I did or why.
Yeah.
And I think it's just one of those things. Like, I haven't managed to develop any kind of metacognition with it, so I haven't managed to internalize it. I haven't. Sorry, educator jargon. I haven't managed to do any kind of critical analysis with what does this relate to what I understand? How can I use this in other ways? What else can I do with it? How does this impact what I already know? I'm just following a recipe, and at the end of it, I'm like, oh, that was weird.
Ryan's got it spot on. It's like trying to do mathematics in Egyptian hieroglyphs.
Well concussed.
Yeah, well concussed. Underwater with a mirror.
Like, wait, which one's sine? Why? I remember someone trying to explain to me what sine actually was, because I've always had this problem with mathematics. If I can't conceptualize what it is I'm doing, it doesn't work. When I was in middle and high school, pretty good at algebra, but I couldn't do trigonometry because I simply could not understand what sine, cosine, and tangent, the buttons I had to press on my calculator, were doing. So someone tried to explain it to me, and they involved a wheel, a pen.
I know the thing you're talking about, yeah.
And I'm like, that's so much worse. Wheels? What the wheel? Why? What am I doing? What's the which one's which? So yeah, all I know about sine is it's a wibbly wobbly wave, and the cosine is the other one. What it does, why I'm using it, no clue. And that really gets in the way, which is why when I'm trying to explain concepts in Godot, I go into quite a lot of depth as to why it's working and what it's trying to do, because that's how my brain tends to remember stuff.
Yeah. One of the things that I've found incredibly useful is Blender's node system. So being able to create textures procedurally using nodes, so you can actually play around with it, and it's a great way of almost formalizing what this is actually doing, because you can change a slider and see it, and you can change it back again and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. One of the things that I remember vividly from a couple of years back is finally understanding why I would use a modulo when I wanted something to repeat over and over again. That's how you do the checkerboard thing. You get something working, and then you just repeat it.
First time I understood modulo, or the first time I understood or internalized bitwise operators, which I actually did for this project, like when we're generating the walls. The ability to understand it and then go, oh, I can apply that to the code I've already written, and change 140 lines of code to 70 lines of code and have the exact same functionality. Like, that's the thing I'm missing with shader code. I don't have enough of a math background, and I don't have enough of a programmer background, that the two together, I just feel like someone is swearing at me and asking for directions in a language I've never heard before. And getting quite angry that I'm not answering them. In I don't know, Mandarin Chinese via Ugandan. I don't know what language is spoken in Uganda.
Using Google Translate as well. Why not throw that in there as well?
Via ChatGPT. Like, I don't even know if this is what it's supposed to be.
I'm
had an interesting. There was a thing on the Godot forums today. Someone was asking, "Is this right?" And they'd got into ChatGPT and they'd said, "Write me a 2D platformer in GDScript for Godot." And it said, "Okay," and here's some code. And the question was, "Is this right?" And a bunch of people were pointing out, if you have to ask if this is right, you shouldn't be releasing this. Like, if you don't understand the code, you shouldn't be writing it.
And I want to jump in there and say that I think that's a very fair thing to say. It's
Agreed.
not being elitist. It's not being gatekeeping. But genuinely, I've played around with ChatGPT for months now, and I'm really enjoying playing with it, using it as a tool to develop ideas and double check things. I even feature it in the Python course. It's like one of the things you can do with your code is dump it in there and see if it thinks it works. And why doesn't this work? And you've got an indentation wrong, or these two things are not whatever. It will bug test for you really, really well. I've also tried creating there's an upcoming video about this, but I've tried creating a whole script in Blender and it works. That's brilliant that you can create a whole add-on that works just by typing in what you desire. But I've also tried just cheating. I would call it cheating at this point. Just going, make me this awesome thing that does X. And I was getting there, and I kept feeding it back the code that I'd got because I made some changes to it. And that's the important thing, I've been making changes to it. I understand what's going on, therefore I'm able to adjust it and change it around. And so I've made all these changes. I dump the code back in and I say, can I also do this? And how would you structure would you change any of the structure of the code, blah, blah, blah. And it gave me a new whole section of code that I could copy and paste in. But then I looked at what it had given me, and it had removed some of the important stuff earlier on. So now the functions later on no longer had access to anything that had been created.
Yep.
And so when you get to a more complex structure that involves multiple parts, you still need to stitch them together. We're not at the point at the moment where you can just say, make me X, and off we go. Yes.
Well, it's not designed to be informative. I mean, I'm looking at Roderick's command.
Yes.
The thing.
So
like,
ChatGPT is a great translator.
It's a text transformation engine, and
Yes.
it's very good at what it does. But what it doesn't have is any kind of theory of mind. It doesn't have a concept of lying. It doesn't understand the words.
Yes, in fact, it's a large language model. In fact, large language models are incredible because they can actually do audio, because audio is a type of language. They can do this, that, and the other. And one of the things with ChatGPT that's kind of memed upon at the moment is you need to be a good prompt engineer. Because if I need something out of ChatGPT, I will actually say, I'm acting as X. I'd like you to act as Y. I want you to give me an answer. Oh, no, I want you to act as two people. I want you to give, be an evaluator and an analyzer or something along those words. Give it two roles and say, you're going to give me code, or whatever you're trying to output. Then the other part of you, your split personality, is going to evaluate that. Give yourself a response and then give me a final result. If you ask something like that often, it will stop making stupid mistakes and be a much better code base. But the fact that you have to type that every single time, it doesn't keep that context.
Great videos on
yes,
on prompt injection attacks.
Yes.
But anyway, that's a topic for another time, and we are out of.
Let's know if you want us to go a deep dive on ChatGPT.
I mean, I'm not an expert in the subject. I do find it very interesting, and I find the way people have reacted to it even more interesting.
Yes.
Because people are trying to get it to do all kinds of things it's really not meant to be doing. But we are now officially out of time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, do you want to sign off?
Sure. Everybody, thank you for joining us. I've had a lovely time. I hope you've had a lovely time. I hope you've had a lovely time, Michael.
Thank you. I have.
I'm
glad I looked the right way.
Yeah, and because that's not where he is. But for you, I'm not finishing any sentences. But yeah, thank you for joining us. I had a lovely time. Thank you for the jelly ice cream, and we will see you next week.
Thank you, everybody. See you then. Bye.
Bye. Press it.
Okay.
Press it.
I'm getting there.